By a round of applause. If you... All right, here we go. If you were given the appropriate amount of time, by a round of applause, how many of you think you could recall the most delicious meal you've ever eaten? Okay. By a round of applause, how many of you think you could recall the most beautiful sunrise or sunset you've ever witnessed? Okay. How about this one? By a round of applause, how many of you think you could recall the most mind-melting orgasm you've ever had? Okay. Thank you for your honesty. Well, I'm willing to bet that the majority of you would have a bit of a harder time recalling the most satisfying breath you've ever taken. This idea of breath appreciation, it's something I work with every single day, and there's this simple little exercise that I'd love to do, and I haven't done it yet today, and I figured now would be a better time than ever. And I'm actually going to get all of you to do it with me. But I'll explain it first, and then we'll go through it, okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to take a nice, long, drawn-in inhale. We're going to draw it out about 4 to 5 seconds. And at the top of that inhale, I'm going to ask that you pause. And in that moment of pause, just see if you can tune in to the physical sensation of that breath. See if you can feel how your diaphragm is dropped to pull the air in. See if you can tap into that feeling of the oxygen-rich blood as it courses through your veins. And then after that brief moment, all together we'll exhale it out on a big sigh, okay? So come up to the edge of your seat. Plant both of your feet. Feel grounded. Let your shoulders soften. Rest your hands. Let your belly relax. Close your eyes. And together, take one long inhale. Hold it for a moment. And then let it go. Now, to me, that is much more delicious than the best meal I've ever tasted. It's far more beautiful than the most miraculous sunrise or sunset I've ever witnessed. Hell, to me, that felt better than the best orgasm I've ever had. Nah. Come on. That's a bit debatable. But I think you get the idea, right? Breath appreciation is important to me because I live with cystic fibrosis. And a very real part in living with cystic fibrosis is knowing that my time on this earth is much more limited than your average person. I'm 30 years old, and I already know that I only have so many of those long, rich, deep breaths left. My lungs currently function at about the 50% range, which isn't bad. Okay, I learned back in high school, 50% still considered a passing grade, so things could be much worse. But for a moment, just consider what it means to apply 50% to your ability to breathe. It can have some pretty profound effects on the way that you live your life. And for the past 10 years or so, my lungs have been on this very slow but very steady decline, which is kind of a buzzkill, right? It depends on how you look at it. And for me, my perspective, cystic fibrosis is the ultimate gift. It has afforded me this worldview where I can embrace the fact that I don't have much time left. And I'm okay with that. In fact, this is the driving force that propels me forward to squeeze out every last bit of life that I can while I'm still here on this earth. It might feel a little bit weird to hear this, but I can stand here today and say that without a doubt, cystic fibrosis is the best thing that has ever happened to me. It has made me who I am. And at the risk of sounding, full of myself, I love who I am. I often hear people say how they would never want their illness to define them. Not me. I proudly let my illness define me, but I let it define me on my own terms. And I think this mindset comes from my lifelong affinity for laughter. When I was growing up, my heroes were not people like Wayne Gretzky or Michael Jordan. My heroes were people like George Carlin. Yeah. Or Chris Farley. Maya Rudolph. Adam Sandler, when he was funny. And it was through their writing and their characters and their stand-up that they gave me this ability to see the world through this lens of mockery and satire. And in turn, I could look at my life and what I've gone through and find elements of that brought a smile to my face. Laughter became this incredibly powerful form of therapy for me. I want to share with you as sort of an example of how I put this to use. by telling you about the scariest moment of my life, which was actually quite recent. It was about a year ago, in October 2017. I had a big hospital scare. I was rushed in. I had this condition called intussusception, not to be confused with the popular Christopher Nolan movie Inception, a dream within a dream within a dream. But intussusception actually isn't that much different. It's an intestine within an intestine within an intestine. So essentially, my large intestine started to swallow up my small intestine, like how you'd roll up a pair of socks. Now, this is not good. You can die from this. So I was brought in for this emergency surgery, and they went in and pulled out 75% of my large intestine and threw it away. But before all that fun stuff, I went in for a round of preliminary tests. We were trying to narrow it down. What is actually happening in my body? And one of these tests was a rectal exam. So I'm in the office waiting, and the doctor enters. I look up, and it's this 6'5", 250-pound beast of a man with mitts for hands and these huge kielbasa sausage fingers. And I'm thinking, this guy? I gotta get a rectal exam from this guy? And he goes, no. He ushers in the resident surgeon. She'll be giving it to you. It's this petite young woman with regular human-sized hands. Whew, okay, all right. So she gloves up, right? Takes her finger, buries it knuckle deep into my butt. I'm not gonna lie. I'm not a stranger to having a finger in my butt, okay? But I'm not so familiar with having a stranger's finger up my butt. But here's the thing. She's not so much a stranger. I feel like I know this woman. I just can't quite put my finger on it. Pun fully intended. So anyway, she finishes the exam, pulls her finger out, walks out into the hallway to deliberate about whatever you deliberate about after you have your finger in someone's ass. And then momentarily she walks back in, and I say, you know what, screw it, I'm gonna ask her. So I say, ma'am, how do I know you? And she looks at me, this is the first time she made eye contact. She looks at me and goes, yeah, you were my yoga instructor. Woof. I've been teaching yoga for the last 8 years, and well, needless to say, she has not been back to the studio since. Did I say scariest moment of my life? I think I meant most embarrassing moment of my life. But this is exactly what Sick Boy Podcast is all about. Right? Sick Boy is a project that I started 3 years ago with my two best friends, Brian Stever and Taylor McGilvery. And the original idea, simply put, was a podcast where we talk to people who are sick, but with a twist. It's a comedy podcast. And to be honest with you, when we started this, it really started as a joke. It was an excuse for the three of us to sit down and try to make each other laugh. Our first episode, actually, the first recording we ever did was just the three of us. We recorded it for about an hour, and it was basically a free pass for Brian and Taylor to ask all the questions that they'd ever want to ask a sick person. And after that recording, we went home and we listened back to what we had done, and we thought to ourselves, hey, maybe we're onto something here. This was the first time that we had heard a conversation surrounding illness that wasn't a complete bummer. It was funny. It was really informative. And there was something about it that was really uplifting and empowering. But we thought, okay, well, maybe this is a fluke. We are three best friends after all. We have this very dialed-in dynamic. Can we recreate this with somebody else? So we put our heads together and we thought, who's the sickest person we know? And it happened to be my friend, Matthew Amiot. And at the time, he had just had a surgery to remove a brain tumor. Matt agreed to come in, and he sat down on the mics with us. And that was the moment where we realized, whoa, this is going to be much greater than anything we ever intended. This is much more important than just a couple of friends trying to make each other laugh. Matthew was so open to being vulnerable with us. He almost immediately invited us in to share and hear in some of the most intimate and private thoughts. He chronicled his cancer journey. He dived into the challenges of facing his own mortality. He talked about how he barely recognized himself anymore when he looked in the mirror, how this recent experience had somehow stripped him of his own self-confidence. And that conversation was so raw. It was so powerfully authentic. And it sounds heavy, but it wasn't. It was light. It was so full of playful curiosity. It was so full of inappropriate humor. And it was this conversation with Matthew that taught us that laughter can be this beautiful tool to really get to the heart of the real stuff, the stuff that matters. Not to be used as a crutch, but rather to be used as this bridge to more easily access the things that we find hard to be open about. Fast forward to today, 3 years later, we have recorded over 200 episodes of Sick Boy. We've spoken to people from all across Canada, down through the United States. We've covered everything from cystic fibrosis to terminal cancer, PTSD, bipolar, schizophrenia, spinal muscular atrophy, endometriosis. I mean, you name it, we've touched on it. And if we haven't, we will. There's a list of over 800 people from across the world who have applied to come on the show and share their experience. And as you can imagine, over the last 3 years, out of all of these conversations, there has been a lot of learning opportunity for us. But I would have to say that we could narrow it down to 3 big takeaways. And I want to share them with you. I call them my 3 aha moments. The first one is be vulnerable. For whatever reason, we as a society, especially us as men, have been taught that vulnerability is this sign of weakness. But I would argue that it pays to be vulnerable. Amen. It does. I mean, take a moment and think about when you truly know someone, what that's like. You know their deepest, darkest secrets. You know their wildest hopes and dreams. You know their greatest fears. You know their most embarrassing moment. And those are the relationships that we value in our lives. And when we have someone come into the studio, they enter as a stranger, but they leave as a true friend because they have chosen to put their trust in us and be vulnerable. And we have chosen to reciprocate that. It pays to be vulnerable. Number 2, life is too short for small talk. I friggin' love this one. Taylor's got this amazing story that he tells on the podcast about this one time he was in Utah, snowboarding on this mountain. And he sits on the chairlift, and this older gentleman sits next to him. The chairlift starts up the mountain. Taylor's minding his own business, taking in the beauty, the scenery. And the gentleman next to him says, "Hey, I'm Bill. Nice to meet you." And Taylor says, "Oh, hi, Bill. I'm Taylor. Nice to meet you." And then Bill says, "Well, Taylor, what's the craziest thing you've ever done in your life?" And Taylor's like, "Whoa, what? God, who opens a conversation with that? I don't know. I guess it was this time I was in Brazil. I almost died. It's a long story." And Bill follows that up with the craziest moment of his life. And then he follows that up with, "Well, Taylor, what do you like more, snowboarding or sex?" Oh my God. I don't know. Snowboarding's fun. I really like sex. It's kind of a toss-up. And it's like this all the way up the mountain. They continue this conversation. They get to the top of the mountain. And I don't know if you've ever been on a chairlift before, but you choose to go right or you go left. Taylor goes right and Bill goes left. And Taylor never saw Bill again. But he'll never forget the 5-minute conversation that they shared from the bottom of that mountain up to the top, where Bill didn't choose to talk about the weather. He chose to cut straight through to the shit that mattered. Life is too short for small talk. And the final aha moment is everyone has an incredible story to share. We rarely have celebrities or people of note on the podcast. Oftentimes, we're just speaking to regular, everyday people. And when they feel like they've been given a platform to speak, when they feel like they have a voice that can be heard, we hear these incredibly rich life stories. And each one of these stories, there are lessons to be learned. There's something to glean from it. And all it takes is for someone to feel like they have the permission to speak, and for somebody else to be on the other end, to be truly listening to that person. Everyone, including each one of you here today, has an incredible story to tell. Our mission is to fundamentally change the way that the world deals with illness and death. But it goes further than that. This isn't just about talking about what it's like to be sick. We want this to be the catalyst to change the way that humans communicate about all the things that we find challenging in our lives. At the heart of what we are doing is just trying to cultivate open, unpolished, unapologetic, meaningful communication with the people in our lives so that we can make the most out of the time that we have left, so that we can really squeeze out that life while we're still here on this earth. Before I leave you, I want to just share with you this study that came out of Harvard University. It was one of the longest running social studies ever conducted. It started in 1939, spanned almost 80 years. And it followed 268 Harvard sophomores. The study concluded that the building blocks of happiness are the relationships that we foster. So essentially, if you want to live a life with long-standing happiness, then foster great relationships. Sounds easy, right? But to foster great relationships, you need to be able to communicate with meaning. And I truly believe that this concept of meaningful communication, it's not something we are born with. It is a skill that is learned through practice and repetition, honed over the span of your lifetime. Before I leave you to go out into the world and to practice this meaningful communication, where you start a conversation that allows yourself to be vulnerable, where you push yourself to cut straight through to the shit that matters, and you are absolutely willing to listen, let's just take one more moment to sit up tall, soften our bellies, relax your shoulders, close your eyes, and all together, take a nice big breath in. Hold it for a moment, and let it go. Thank you all so much.